What is a purchase order? A purchase order, or PO, is a legal document a buyer sends to a supplier or vendor to authorize a purchase. Purchase orders outline what the buyer would like to purchase and how much of it they would like to receive. These agreements help both the buyer and seller document their transactions. If you are working with a client, they are considered the buyer, and your agency is the supplier or the vendor. On the other hand, if you are engaging the services of a third-party supplier or vendor, your agency is considered the buyer. Why do we need a purchase order? Purchase order allows the seller to ensure they can provide the goods and services requested before committing to fulfillment, giving the buyer time to plan accordingly. It also helps the buyer and seller maintain accurate, detailed records for auditing and financial statements. How does a purchase order work? Buyer decides to order items from the seller. Before an order can be placed, the buyer must be able to identify a need that the seller's product or service can fulfill. Buyer drafts purchase order and sends to seller for approval. With the information in place, the buyer should draft the purchase order and send it to their seller for approval. When sending the purchase order to a seller, indicate when approval is needed to keep the process timely. Seller reviews purchase order and confirms if they can fulfill the request. Once the seller receives the purchase order, it's up to them to review the request and check inventory or availability to confirm if it can be fulfilled by the date needed by the buyer. Purchase order approval. If the seller can fulfill the request as instructed by the buyer, they'll approve the purchase order, making it legally binding for both parties. Service fulfillment. During this final stage, the buyer is responsible for paying the invoice per the payment terms indicated by the seller. It's now up to you, the buyer, to submit payment for the invoice according to agreed upon payment terms.